And it's not, and again, I'm not looking for business from these people.
Yeah.
I want to, it feels good to me. And if it feels good to you, you'll have a better energy about you. You make somebody's day, and you never know where it'll lead, but it could lead somewhere great. And, but more importantly, it'll nourish you as a person.
Hello and welcome to Beyond Networking, the show where we help you build a sustainable career in an unpredictable world. We believe if you learn to weave a network of people who trust you, who feel heard, understood, and valued in your presence, there will always be someone willing to hire you, buy from you, or work with you. On this show, we feature intimate conversations with legends and leaders of industries about the relationships, connections, and chance encounters that form the foundation of success. Remember to subscribe for world-class insights on how to build a life and career that you are proud of. And join our community at beyondnetworkingpodcast.com. All right, that's it for me. Now it's time to go beyond networking with this week's guest,
Rich Rochlin, attorney extraordinaire.
Rich. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really do appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, man, it's such a pleasure. We've known each other for a couple of years. Actually, more than a couple of years now.
Yeah.
I feel like I was a baby magician when we first met.
It's probably, it could be as much as 8 or 10.
Could be. Yeah, I wanted to say 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah, we met through actually someone who helped launch this podcast, which was Pam Pados.
Oh, I love Pam.
Mutual friend of ours, and so we got connected through her a million years ago. So let's start first with what you're up to right now. So if you're at a cocktail party or a social gathering these days, and someone asks you, "What do you do?" I know. What's your answer these days?
So, well, I mean, I've always been very particular about that question because, as much as what you do for a living is really sort of the main thing about you. You spend 8-10 hours a day doing that. So it does form sort of who you are in some ways. But I also like to know, like, what makes people happy? Like, what do you do to make you happy? What are your other things? But, the job is an important thing. What do you do? Well, you're a speaker, a magician. I'm an attorney, right? So that's my profession. I've been an attorney 20 years. But, I'm restoring a 66 Mustang in my driveway. I'm a dad to 3 kids, 5, almost 4, and 8-month-old, a husband to a beautiful wife. And so what am I doing? I'm doing mostly family law, divorce, custody, those kinds of things. I work on my car, play with my kids, try to be a good husband, all of those things. So that's what's going on now, really.
I got to tell you, I have asked that question dozens of times on this podcast. I've asked, if you're at a cocktail party and someone asks, "What do you do?" How do you answer? Because I like to start there. And I have hoped dozens of times somebody would give me an answer that wasn't their job. No one ever has until you. That is the first time ever that someone gave me an answer that wasn't just their job or and people will go, "Well, that's hard to answer because like this is technically my job, but like I have these different aspects and that's interesting." But I love that you immediately kind of roped in your family, your hobbies, all the other things that when someone says, "What do?" you could answer with. It doesn't have to be your job.
Well, right. And I think we can talk about that in how it relates to connection, because one of the things and we can talk about my background and what's, where I was raised and my family and these types of things, because what I found is, as somebody who's a solo practitioner, essentially somebody who works on their own. I'm a salesperson, right? I have to sell my wares, right? And I perform services, and I'm selling not widgets, but I'm selling a product, me. And so not only am I a lawyer, but I'm a salesperson. I have to generate sales to keep my business afloat and to pay my bills. And so part of that, I think, also is being multidimensional, and most people are multidimensional, but also sharing that with people so you can make a connection with them. And then that person will say, this guy's not just a lawyer. He's going to be somebody who's listening to me. I can identify with him. He's talking about interesting things with me. I'm curious about them. And that's such an important part of growing a business where I'm selling myself. So that's part of it.
See, that I'm selling myself. I think that phrase is really, really important right now, because I find myself so often over the last couple of years telling people, everybody's in sales. Everybody's a marketer now, and people are like, no, I'm not in marketing. I'm like, then you have misunderstood what you're doing right now, right? Because you're everybody all the time. If you're in a job interview, you're selling yourself. If you are, if you're in a writer of any kind, you're selling ideas. You can sell a product or a service, obviously. Like, we are all trying to pitch ourselves or an idea or a product or a service to somebody in hopes of getting them on board with whatever we're doing. And I right away want to ask how you feel about this movement in authenticity. I'm seeing this phrase on the internet a lot. It's become a real buzzword, authenticity. And I feel like people have misunderstood authenticity to mean you should be sharing photos of what you had for breakfast on Instagram, right? And so you just talked about your, sharing your hobbies and your personal life. How do you navigate when you're sharing enough to make a connection versus too much to seem unprofessional?
Yeah, that's, it's sort of like, the old expression, being a lady is like being powerful. If you have to tell me you are, you're not. Right? Like someone says,
I don't think I've ever heard that.
No, right. But if somebody says, well, I'm a lady, like, well, if you have to tell me that, you're probably not. Right. It's just like saying, well, I'm powerful. Well, if you have to tell me, you're not.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is, genuineness, which is, I think, sort of a part of what authenticity is just sort of how you live, your life without, you're not intending to do that. It's just who you are. You have a genuine curiosity. And some people probably have to work harder at that. I just feel that I am who I am. I don't put on airs. I want to help people. And it probably comes from the fact that I'm from, the first in my family to go to college, from a working class family.
I don't mean to interrupt. What did your parents do professionally, if you don't mind me asking?
So, both of my dad left the family when I was a few months old. So I was raised by a single mom. I met my dad when I was 38. I was raised by a single mother. My mother is very intelligent, but she has a high school education, which is fine. She worked at the Veterans Administration in an administrative role. She mostly had administrative positions and whatnot. We survived on Section 8 and oil assistance and food stamps. Luckily for me, I tested well, and my mom put me into private schools because the nursery school folks said to my mom, "Look, you have sort of this great piece of clay here, if you will. But the problem with little boys without dads, as we now know from all of the studies, is especially smart little boys without dads, is it goes two paths. Either they go to jail, and they enter juvenile delinquency very early, and then their life falls apart, or they can do really well and excel. And so you really should get him in a place that can, and I'm also highly distractible. So you got to get him somewhere where it's a smaller class where somebody can focus and challenge him. So my mom, knowing that, got me into private schools. I tested well, and we were poor, so I got scholarships. And I was able to go to, we lived in a town that didn't really have a great public school system. It was large. And so she got me into private schools, and through high school, I went to private schools on scholarships. But that saved me because I needed that, and, without the rudder of a father, and without, 40 kids in a class, I would have been in trouble. So I have a very unique perspective where, I can, then I ultimately went, I'm jumping a little ahead, but I went to college in DC at American University, and then I went to law school at UConn, and then I went to a big law firm, 1,200 lawyer firm, and sort of was doing, large corporate finance deals. So, but at the same time, also, I worked for electrical contractors and plumbing contractors. In college, my grandfather was an HVAC guy. So, I can build a house and do the plumbing and the electrical. I know how to do all that stuff. So, like, I can be on a job site with bricklayers and totally fit in, but I can be in a boardroom with CEOs and totally fit in. So I have this unique perspective where I can sit down with whomever it is. I don't put on airs. I don't have any judgment. I can relate to the guys that are laying bricks and relate to the guys that are the CEOs. And that gives me such an advantage.
That first of all, there's like 43 different questions I have based on what you just told me. So I'm going to see if I can find all of them as we go. But that just, my instinct, as you said, there's something I had forgotten. I used to get asked a lot when I was a magician once I had kind of made it.
Well, you're still a musician.
Well, sure. But when I was a full-time professional musician.
And I mean that a good way, by the way.
No, I appreciate that.
That's in the heart.
But when I was a full-timer and I had made it, and in the digital age,
Right.
there's not that many magicians that you can see that are like successful without being famous. And so once you're that, you start getting emails and messages from younger performers and aspiring magicians. And I started getting a lot of those asking for help and advice. And one of the pieces of advice I found myself giving younger aspiring magicians constantly was totally out of left field to them, which I used to find myself saying, if you want to be a great magician, study lots of different things, take lots of different classes, learn as much about different parts of the world as you can, because when you're in front of an audience, the more stuff you know, the more chances you have to connect with that particular
Absolutely.
audience. And that's not what they were expecting from how do I become a magician, right? So that aspect, it sounds like you ended up in that situation by happenstance or circumstance. It doesn't sound like that's something you deliberately
No.
sought out.
Just
So I'm going to jump to a question I've normally been reserving for the end of these
Sure.
conversations lately. I've been obsessed lately with the role that luck plays in success. I'm actually something that very few people know right now, and I may decide to cut this later if I don't want people to know yet. But I'm in the middle of working on my second book. I've been actively working on it for a while now, and it is all about the role of luck and success. Do you believe in luck?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that there's it surely it does seem that people that work hard tend to be more lucky or
Yeah.
luckier. I don't know the answer to that. The sort of the universe, sometimes I think things happen. I'm not sold on it, I would say. I'm sort of maybe. And I know that's not an answer you like, but I mean,
this moment is exactly why I'm writing the book, is because people don't know how they feel. They use the language of luck a lot until you ask them directly about it, right? We talk about, oh man, what I find really interesting is when you think about the people that you kind of consider your professional rivals or maybe people you're jealous of, whenever they're really successful, they're always lucky, right? Whenever someone you're a rival of, when you're
that's typical, right? But I study them and see that that's not the case, though.
Right, but exactly, right? You always feel about yourself. I feel like I always feel, well, when I'm successful, that wasn't luck. I worked really hard for that. I made all these moves. When I see someone else do it, I was like, well, they just got really lucky. I mean, look how lucky that was. And so my question is it that people who work really hard tend to be more lucky, or is it just people who are really lucky end up being the successful ones, and that's why we think that?
It could be. It could also be that, for instance, you're not comparing two race cars, right? We're human beings, and the brain is so complex, and it's shaped and formed by our childhoods, by our parents. So, for instance, when I didn't go to Christmas parties at the Hartford Golf Club where CEOs and doctors, and I'm going on, ski trips with those kids. I don't, so some folks have access to people that have power, that have influence, and maybe they get an internship somewhere that I couldn't have gotten because I don't run in those circles. So is that part of luck that got them that internship, so that their roommate in college was the son of the Hartford CEO and then came out, they gave him an entry-level job, they golf, they go on vacations together, and before you know it, they're in some place. They could still work hard, they could still be smart, but they had the luck to be born into that family, or the fortune to be born into that family that gave them those opportunities. So that is a component of it, I think. And you still, in my view, in most cases, still have to have the chops. You can't just be, one of these guys that, we say all hat, no cattle, you can't be, you got to still have the chops in most cases. But there is that component by to whom you were born, the family you were born to, that does present other opportunities that really could advance your career faster and farther than people that say don't have that.
So I tend to agree with you on that a lot. One of the things I'm looking into, I feel like I couldn't do a book on luck justice without acknowledging the role that privilege plays in success, right? So like that aspect of being born into the right family. I think you're very right, though. 100 years, you might have been able to coast on just being in the right family, but that is gone. I think you can be born to the right family. You got a head start in that race. but there's a lot of people right behind you that are going to catch up real quick if you don't have the chops and the
And that's the beauty of
determination.
America. That's not in other countries. You don't see that. Like in England, for instance, like your dad's a bricklayer, you're not going to become president. You know, Bill Clinton was raised in a trailer park with his abusive stepfather, and he became president of the United States, and he was a Rhodes Scholar, all those different things. That's unique to us, and what makes us, we can come out of that sort of caste system where other countries, you know, you're a working class family, it's very hard, nearly impossible to break out of it.
It's interesting. I wonder if that's changing at all, though, with the digital revolution and with what the internet is doing to kind of flatten the playing field. I wonder if we're going to see less of that or see more opportunities for anybody in other countries, kind of like the archetypal American idea, you know, simply because everyone with a smartphone now has access to virtually everything.
That's right.
So that's curious. Yeah. I'm also especially curious because your answer was immediately about people who had kind of privileged upbringings and all these additional opportunities, but yours was specifically the opposite of that. And yet, right, you didn't have that privileged upbringing. You weren't born into that. And yet you found all of this success through all of the same kinds of circumstances, and that makes me very curious.
And sort of that's the irony of me, right? Right. I mean right. So yes. And so how did I do? Well, I was at private school, but I was the poor kid at private school. So private school, you were playing with different folks as well, but also
being the poor kid at private school make you work harder?
No. Not for me.
Okay.
I still had my issues. I didn't work as hard as I should have.
So when did that work ethic start then? Where did that come from? Because I've found a lot of people who are really successful, you'd think they were always like that. I've found most of those people developed that work ethic much later in life than you would expect.
That's right. I think I'm certainly much smarter, even though, you know, there's this whole thing about IQ and it's supposed to be the same really from the time you're 7 and up. I think I'm much smarter than I was a long time ago, much more experienced. Where did the work ethic come from? I think the work ethic came from, you know, I think if you talk to folks who knew me, and so I've been a lawyer 20 years, who looked at me in the first 10 years, they wouldn't say as good of things about me as a lawyer and my work ethic as they would in the second half. And the reason is because I'm doing something that I really enjoy.
Okay, so when did that flip? So let's go back to those 43 questions I had. So you have this story where the first half, or maybe not the first half, but for a while you were doing the big corporate thing.
Yeah, big corporate law. You know, in a room, you're not dealing with clients with day-to-day problems. You're dealing with hedge funds that are you know, buying an oil company in Houston. And so you're you're reviewing documents, you're drafting documents, you're sending it to some other lawyer in New York City who's there at 1:00 in the morning, who's been there all night. And
did it beat you down over time, or did you have like a TV moment where you're like, this is this case, and I can't do this anymore? And
no,
I walked out.
At some point the partners where I were like, this isn't for you. Kind of
oh,
thing.
really?
Yeah.
So somebody else saw it.
Somebody saw that, right?
Did.
And I was young. I didn't know anything really. I was in my, you know, so I'm 44. I became a lawyer when I was 24 or 25. I went right from college to law school. So I was 30 years old. And what do you know at 30 years old?
Nothing.
So, you know, and then I went, and then from there I bounced to a couple other corporate gigs, and I did that. And then I went off on my own, and I was still doing the corporate work, which is very hard to do if you're sort of a smaller law firm. You can get litigation work, but not corporate work. It's sort of a strange thing that's for a different podcast, and it's way too inside baseball. But I was testifying in court on behalf of a company who was the main asset in the divorce, and a lawyer came up to me who was on the other side, and the judge sort of pulled me aside and said, you know, you really should come in for your client, not as this corporate lawyer testifying, but you should do this divorce work. And I said, it's the first time I've been in court since I was sworn in 10 years ago. Court? What are you talking about? Trial? They're like, no. We asked around about you. You have good pedigree. You'd be great at this kind of work. There's just something about you'd be great at this kind of work. This is a chance encounter, but I have another story too. But so the judge said that to me, and she says, I used to work with one of the partners who knew you. I asked about you because I was testifying for a couple of days, and they said you'd be great at this. And the other lawyer said, listen, and this is one of the premier divorce attorneys who's now a mentor of mine, who became a mentor of mine. He said, you know, we can work together on this case and we'll get it resolved. And this is a case where hundreds of thousands had already been spent on legal fees and all of these things. And so I went to my client. I said, listen, the judge sort of said, your lawyers, you're in a bad spot. The other lawyer said they can say, would you have confidence in me coming in to try to settle this case that's been going on for 2 years? And he says, I would. He's an entrepreneur type, he just trusts his gut kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, I would. So I said, all right. So I wound up doing that. I met with the other lawyer, got up to speed, and I had the case settled in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And it had gone on for years. So the other lawyer who had brought me in said, listen, don't refer your divorce cases out anymore. You got to do this work, and I'm going to help you. You come to me. I'll help you through it. And before you know it, that's what I'm doing. And I love it, and I have a knack for it. And it was literally just because I was testifying in court and a judge sort of saw something in me that you'd be good at this. She was the presiding judge of family. Judge O'Lear, I'll give her name. I mean, she's still a judge. That's fine. And the other lawyer's name was Steve Dembo, who's a friend of mine and still my mentor, one of the premier divorce attorneys around. Wow. And he helped me. And then before you know it, we're 40 active cases, and that's what I do.
Wow. And how long ago was that?
That
you
was
made that
probably
transition?
2011, 2012.
Okay, it's probably right around the time we met, actually.
That's right.
Because the way we met was, I think we met because you hired me to do magic at a baby shower for your first kid.
That was the extravaganza.
Yes, yes. It was an extravaganza. I remember when you called and described it, going, this guy's full of it. There's no way. I've done these events before. They're not. That was some crazy. Yeah, that was wild.
I think I have the video. It's on Vimeo. You can link it when you post this,
so
people can
I'll
see
put it in the show notes.
No, we had a marching band.
It was a New Orleans marching band. It was like a 15, 12 piece band. It was nuts.
Oh yeah, it was great.
I remember coming. I was going to say coming back and telling Lindsay. Obviously, that couldn't have been true if it was that long.
Well, I'll tell you what it was. So
yeah.
My son was born in November of 2014. So it would have been.
But that's the year Lindsay and I met. It must have been.
It was September of 2014.
Okay.
It was about 6 years ago.
Yeah, so we started. Yeah, so okay, it was Lindsay. So we started dating in 2013.
There you go.
So it actually, I had that in my memory. I'm like,
but yeah, no, we had 6 different chefs. I had all my people that I've connected with.
It was wild.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
They all connected with, and so that's when it happened, and then my whole practice then shifted.
Yeah.
And this is all I do now. And for a while, I had a hard time telling people. As a lawyer, you say, well, what do you do? Well, you don't want to turn business away, but now I just say to people, I do divorce work. But I say to people, whatever your problem is, come to me. I'll triage it and I'll get you to the right guy.
Interesting.
But I don't, I take some litigation, but that's
so it. That I feel like it would have been easy to just let that go for anybody who's listening, to slip right past that. If you're going into, not everybody who listens to this is going to be self-employed, or I try not to go. It's easy for me to go into the self-employed entrepreneurship conversation, and you forget that like the vast majority of people are not doing that and have no interest.
Right.
And there's nothing better about being self-employed than it's just a different thing. But for anybody who's listening who might go into being self-employed or an entrepreneur or whatever, that point you just made about, I let anybody come to me and I do my best to point them in the right direction, even if it's not me, and it's probably not me, right? That for me has been exactly the key to my success. Apart from building connections, right? That's the key to everything, right? But outside of that, the having the confidence to say to people, I'm not for you.
Oh, for sure.
But that person is, or I know this person. And that's actually part of being a connector, right? Not just making your own connections, but being the one who goes, nope, I'm not the one. I won't take your money because I'm not the right. I could take your money. I do a mediocre job.
Right.
It's not for me.
You're not going to be happy with me.
Right, exactly. And I'm not going to be happy working with it, but I know exactly who's for you. That I just wanted to like hone in on that for a second. That's so important.
And as a pro tip for folks that are building a business of some kind, one, it's the right thing to do. A lot of lawyers get in huge problems. I sit on the grievance panel in Middlesex County, and lawyers get grieved. There's a disciplinary body that we have licensure, and a lot of the grievances that come in and where lawyers get in trouble is they take on something, their heart's not in it, they take the money, they screw the whole thing up, or they don't do anything, they don't call the people back, and then suddenly they're facing a suspension of their license. So the most important thing is, you got to put your ego aside and say, look, I'm not going to be good at this. And even though you need to, the light bill is coming due, you got to push it away. The second thing is you build you build a goodwill with other lawyers. So the other lawyers will say, Rich is my divorce guy. He sends me this kind of work. And so there's doing that. And then people will appreciate it. And they'll say, look, I tell them that. I say, look, I'm not your guy for that. I'm not going to do a good job on this. I won't. And you're going to hate me. And it's not fair. And it's unscrupulous. And take it. And then the other, and you got to make sure that the person you're sending it to is got to be rock solid, because that's a reflection of you. And actually, there's actually a legal problem too. If that person screws up, you can actually be sued for negligent referral. It's different as a lawyer, but
that doesn't happen as a magician.
As a magician,
nobody comes back to me and like, this guy sucked at card tricks, and I'm suing you.
I saw what he did, right? So, but you just got to be mindful of that. But that's part of the connection, and you make the connection, and you call him and say, "Hey, Brian, I'm sending you somebody," and you're like, "Oh, Rich is my guy. He thinks of me."
So, okay, I'm like overwhelmed with your enthusiasm for being an attorney, for being a lawyer. And what I want to ask is, I think the average person, if you ask them, if you mention the word lawyer or attorney, they're going to clam up. There's a stereotype out there of what that is from TV or the movies, maybe. What are some of the misconceptions about being an attorney or a lawyer?
I'll answer that, but first I'll give you a non-responsive answer. Then I'll be responsive as lawyers, I say. First of all, I think the sort of the criticism of attorneys is skin deep, right? Everyone says, "Oh, you're a shark, you're a lawyer, you're a dirtbag." There's all this theory. But I always find that skin deep, because as soon as you have a problem, right? If you were in a problem, you'd say, you got to call Rich, or you got to call Dave. He's my guy. He's a good guy. And he's going to get me out of this problem. So everyone sort of jokes about lawyers, but when they have a problem, they go to their lawyer because they want to get them out, and they recognize it's a very good system that we have. And you got to find somebody who's competent to sort of navigate you through that. Misconceptions about lawyers. Not all lawyers make a lot of money.
Interesting.
Not all lawyers make a lot. There's plenty of lawyers that come out of law school, first-time lawyers, that can make, at a first-time job, $45,000 or $50,000, and they have $200,000 in debt.
Right.
There's, that's a huge misconception that lawyers are all rich. Not true. And in fact, a lot of solo practitioners don't make a lot of money. It takes a long time to make a lot of money. So there's that. What's another misconception? That all lawyers may love their job. They don't. Most lawyers have very high suicide rate, very high job dissatisfaction rate, lots of stress.
To what do you know? To what that's attributed, the high jobs dissatisfaction? Because I'd heard that before, that's on the dissatisfaction end of the spectrum, whereas like teachers and nurses who make very little and are theoretically underappreciated have incredibly high job satisfaction, right? Which is, I've always found really interesting. It's not, the money rarely correlates. What happens in your field that leads to job dissatisfaction?
Well, I think, it could be that folks are chasing the money, not chasing what they like.
Okay.
There's that. That's sort of you'd find anywhere, right? They're chasing, and it depends what they're doing. A lot of lawyers don't. It takes a lot of courage to go off on your own, and to explore different areas. Remember, lawyers, unlike doctors have a residency program, so they are under the watchful eye of another physician for a very long time, and they get to train. You take the bar exam and you pass, you can do anything that Alan Dershowitz can do or F. Lee Bailey can do. So you have the same license.
I had not considered that.
Yeah, right. So
really
it's wild.
Weird.
It's wild. There's no training. I mean, you go to a big firm, you're trained, and you're not unleashed to the world, to go to court and all of these things. But ostensibly, you could get your license and do a murder trial the next week.
I mean, even like my wife's an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist, who I'm sure you know well.
Yeah. They have to put the hours in.
Right. They, even after they've done their 4 years of undergrad, 3+ years to a master's, they have 2 more years to a license. And they're thousands of hours. They're being supervised constantly.
And they take a test.
Right. Because they're dealing with people's mental health, there's this unbelievably high bar. You'd think there would be that
crazy
bar for people in charge of legal issues.
It's insane. And there's talk about sort of looking at that again, where how it used to be, 200 years ago, where you'd have to do an apprenticeship, and that's when there weren't really law schools, and you'd have to go out there and you'd work under a lawyer, and that's a big problem, especially for new lawyers, where if they can't get a job at a big firm or a firm won't hire them, and they have to hang up their own shingle. I help young lawyers sometimes that I'll meet, and they'll call me and like, how do I do this? I'm like, you're doing that? Like, are you whoa, like that's a landmine, brother. I mean, this profession is filled with landmines. And luckily, as you get more experienced, and if you sort of keep your ego in check, you could spot them, right? Like sort of keep your, but I mean, 2-3 times a month, I'm calling other lawyers saying, how do I navigate this? This is
Yeah.
a nightmare. Like a client told me something that they're going to do that's fraudulent. There's an attorney-client privilege, but there's a whole series of case law and statutes and ethics rules about if a client tells you they're doing something fraudulent, does that trump the attorney-client confidentiality and the privilege? And in fact, it does. And how do you get out of a case but protecting their interest? So it's a landmine. Landmines are everywhere. And without any training, you have someone's livelihood in their hands. I mean, sometimes you have their life in your hand, their liberty in your hands.
Yeah.
So it can be, that can be stressful. But I think that, so back to your question about the job satisfaction, I think it relates to people chasing money instead of chasing something that sort of nourishes them. And for me, I found something that I really enjoy because I'm helping real people with real problems. You're also sort of helping them get through a relationship problem, which is sort of interesting, right? They're now in court in litigation with somebody they used to love at one time, or maybe still love, and they're angry with, and they made children with. And so this is the first time they're in court, but it's not only the first time they've been in court, they're in the first time in court with somebody that's the father or mother of their children that they loved or still loved, that may have had an affair, so they're angry with them. And I have to manage all of that. And which is much different than a hedge fund saying, yeah, we're spending $300 million, we're buying this oil company, do all the due diligence, do the contract, we'll wire the money when it's ready, and they're happy, they sign the deal, and they're done. Here is, I'm going to take you through this process, get you divorced, help you set up a new household, how you're going to share your kids, how you're going to survive on, each having one income. Is there going to be child support? Is there going to be alimony? And how are you going to get on with your life so that you can find love again? And your kids are going to not circle the drain and melt down and have difficulty, and get you out of this as quickly as we can with the least amount of damage. It's a lot of stuff, but I like that.
What's amazing is that sounds so much closer to the training, to the thing that you would expect a therapist to be able to do, that I cannot imagine they're teaching you in law school.
Not at all. Not even
right?
close.
Like, because what you're describing is what I think Chris Voss, the negotiation expert,
Oh yeah,
would call
I watched his masterclass.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You enjoy it?
Yeah.
He has agreed to come on the podcast this
What?
season. Actually,
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
still working on nailing him down because
Oh.
he's hard to get a hold of.
Well, he's going to negotiate with you, right? Of course he is. He's going to test you.
He calls that tactical empathy. That's all I could think of when you were describing that, is like, they don't train for that, right?
No. I mean, so in law school, they teach you how to be what we say is an appellate lawyer. So what an appellate lawyer does is, when you have a trial and the judge makes a ruling, if you don't like that ruling, you take it to the appellate court. And what the appellate court is, you don't ask, there's no witnesses, there's no exhibits, nobody testifies. You're basically saying to the judges in Connecticut, it's a 3-judge panel. You're saying what the court did, and here's a transcript of what happened, here's all the stuff that we filed. What the court did was wrong, and you should reverse it because of what they did was wrong. The lawyers argue it, they ask you some questions, they look at everything, and then they write a decision. That's an appellate lawyer. And so you're taught that in law school. Identify the issue, how to write, how to argue persuasively, and you get a decision. That's what you're taught to be as an appellate lawyer, ostensibly, and how to think critically. You're not taught tactical empathy. You're not taught how to, manage a client who's, borrowing $7,000 from their college roommate to pay your retainer and is wondering how they're going to survive because their husband, who's progressively become a worse alcoholic, is now in rehab, lost their job, the mortgage is going into foreclosure, the kid who's special needs is acting out and cutting themselves. She's got pressure from her job because she works for a dentist in Suffield and is trying to, go to court but not get fired because it's a small dental office. And you're trying to work all that and tell them, we need to get you through this. But if your husband's, hired somebody who's difficult and he's pushing and the kids are falling apart, and trying to keep all this together and then manage their expectations, there's nothing that'll teach you for that. You have to jump in and you have to do it, and you have to help, and you have to be willing to take calls after hours, and you have to be willing to manage expectations, and you have to be willing to cry and hold their hand and also be objective enough to give them good advice when they are absolutely, at the floor of your office in the fetal position saying, how am I going to do this? How are my kids going to survive this? But I get up every day wanting to go help people do that because, and frankly, and a story that's, I think, a good story here, which is how I'm a little bit different, is my wife and I went out. My wife, who's a stay-at-home mom, she was a librarian before. We went out to dinner with another lawyer couple, which my wife usually dreads because we talk shop the whole time, you know. But she's used to it, and she can talk shop because she knows, she works in the office a little bit, so she knows about the cases. But one of this other divorce lawyer said, we were out, and I was out with one of my clients, former clients, the 1 in 100 clients that becomes a friend. And Sarah looks at me and looks at her and says, 1 in 100 clients? You ever been to one of Rich's parties? 95% of his clients are there. Like, they become friends. And again, and that's part of the empathy. Like, I'm taking you through such a stressful, intimate thing. I see all your finances. I know, when people were sleeping together last, how the intimacy faded in their relationship, how the husband or the wife was screwing around with the pool boy, whatever it is. So I'm like a therapist. You're into all the most intimate things. And we're talking about custody, people's most prized possessions, not the right word, but prized, things in their lives. And so for me, I cannot not become friends with the person because I've taken them through this. And again, that helps sort of also build the word of mouth referrals because I've made that connection. And I'm not doing it for that purpose. It's just who I am. And it's what I like to do. And I want to help people. And if you help people and you're earnest and you're honest and you're empathetic, things will sort of build on themselves. That's what I find.
I want to get to your chance encounter story because everybody knows you come on the show. They're ready to talk. I got one more question on that point though. I just don't want. I want to leave this track too quickly. I'm doing the math in my head, and I was thinking about, okay, so 8 or 9 years ago, and that's roughly when you started really leaned into this area of the work. That's also when you started a family and did that whole thing. And now you got 3 kids now, which is, by the way, for those of us who are connected with you on Facebook, is just a riot.
Add me on Facebook, please.
You really have fun. We'll make sure that we'll link something in the show notes, whatever you tell me I should link. Because
my kids are awesome.
Your kids are awesome. The photos are awesome. You're an amateur photographer, or I don't want to say amateur, but like you're a passionate photographer as a hobby, as am I.
The kids are all very beautiful, thanks to my wife, and they're great, and they're all very special. My 5-year-old is going on 14, and
I bet. So to that point, I'm really curious right now, as a lawyer, especially a family and divorce lawyer, has that training helped you in those negotiations with your kids, or have you actually, or have you learned more about negotiating from your kids?
Well, not the kids. A therapist could probably spend a lot of time sort of wondering why I went into this as a child of divorced parents. I was divorced once before. I didn't have kids, but I've been divorced.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I was married for 10 years, but we didn't have kids. So figuring this out. So what do I learn? Does it is it one of these things where my unconscious brought me to this to say you're going to teach you not how to get divorced and screw your whole life up?
How funny.
No, it's you learn, so I don't know. So there's a million things we could talk about, but one of the things you learn, dealing with a lot of times psychologists get involved in cases, they do evaluations. You're in touch with your clients' mental health providers because you want to see sort of how they're doing. And one of the things, the number one thing you learn is what kills a marriage mostly. A variety of things do, but the number one thing in my view and what I've learned is empathy, lack of empathy. And the way that manifests itself, and this is the story I tell, is somebody says to you, your wife says to you, comes to you and says, hey, you say, hey, we're going to my folks for Christmas Eve dinner. And your wife says to you, I don't really want to go there. Your dad doesn't pay attention to me. They belittle me or whatever they say that. And you say, oh, what are you, crazy? Like, everyone loves you. Forget it. You sort of downplay that instead of saying, oh my God, I'm sorry. Oh my God, I didn't know that. Like, how do we got to figure out a way through this. Like, I'm sorry you feel that way. Tell me what he does. Do you think it would be helpful if we sat down with him? That's the difference between marriages that can last and marriages that fall apart when you erode that relationship with the lack of empathy. So that's one of the things that we see. And then of course there's an affair. The affair doesn't kill the relationship. The relationship is dead long before that.
Sure.
But anyhow, that's one of the things that you see. Sort of that lack of empathy. So I don't know. I think your question before I went on this tangent was, you learn negotiating from the kids? No, toddlers are savages. They make demands, and their brains aren't wired properly. So there's nothing you can learn from them. You're just dealing. You don't know what you're going to get. It's inconsistent. They're disordered,
Yeah. That example is so powerful. I also have divorced parents many times over, each of them multiple divorces, and that's a big part of my story, and things you don't realize inform who you become until you can look
Yeah.
backwards, right? You look back and you go, oh, obviously I ended up in the field doing what I'm doing
Right.
now, talking about, like, how obvious is it that I ended up here? But if you had asked me, I never wanted to end up in this field. I never even knew this field existed or what, right? So that's interesting. That example, though, echoes the example for relationships you just gave. I think echoes what's going on right now in the professional world too, because you just described why the number one reason marriages fall apart is that lack of empathy.
Right.
Well, that's the number one problem in business relationships, and it's the number one problem in employee-employer relations as well. We find this every year. LinkedIn does the studies every year, and Laszlo Bach, the former head of human resources for Google, I use this example in all my presentations. He did this deep study at Google to find out why they were having an employee retention problem, right? Because if you're any other company and you're having employee retention problems, you looked at places like Google, who are the top in the world, and you go, if only we had what they have, we wouldn't have employee retention problems, right? But if you're Google, you're the best of the best, and you're still having this problem. So what he found through this deep internal study that he now goes and consults for other organizations
Right.
on is the number one reason employees quit their place of employment is they don't feel like their hard work is being acknowledged.
That's right. They're not valued.
They're not valued. They're not seen.
And
They're not
Google pays
understood.
the most of anyone.
And they'll take
less.
People will gladly take less, not a
Right.
lot less, but a little less. They'll take slightly worse benefits, less perks, a little bit less
They'll
pay
be happier.
for a place that they feel valued. And it's just so.
And
it's,
that's what it is. And your
Yeah.
and your wife or your spouse needs to feel valued.
Yeah.
And you have to work at it all the time because you get frustrated, you get angry,
Oh yeah.
and you're stressed out from work. And but you got to make time to value that person.
So let's turn the corner
Yeah.
here in on to everybody comes on and I ask them for a chance encounter story. This could be personal or professional. Some moment where you met someone and either you impacted their life, they yours, whether you stayed in touch with them or not. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, so it's a professional one. It's somebody
Great.
that we both know. It's just when I was starting my sort of going off on my own. It's feast or famine, right?
Mhm.
It's really hard to start your own practice. Again, I wasn't doing the divorce work. I was just sort of finding work as I could and just trying to cobble things together. And I love good food. And I took my wife to I think it's still called this down in Ivoryton, which is a hamlet of Essex. It's called the Copper Beech Inn. And I had found it on, I don't know, one of these reservations, Open Table or something. Or I'd heard about it somewhere. I said, oh, let's go to Copper Beech Inn. Great little place. It's like a bed and breakfast kind of place. There's 12 or 15 rooms. And so we went there and they had there's a sort of a more formal dining room and then like a tavern, like a brasserie type of place. So we went there and it was maybe, I don't know, I think it was a Tuesday or something. It was sort of a Monday night. And the restaurant would always be open because they have rooms there. And usually restaurants close on Mondays. Monday is industry night. So if you ever go out to other restaurants that are open on Monday, usually cater to people in the industry that are off on Monday. So all the good, like great parties you can go to on Monday nights. But anyhow, so we go there and we have this like lights out meal. You're just ordering stuff. And I remember it was like this sort of pan-seared chicken. Very simple, but I mean, just sort of finishing the meal, you're like lights out good. And the waitress, hi Natasha, I'm still friends with her. We actually became friends. I actually shot her wedding. She lives in Burlington now. We've stayed in touch over these years because I just made a connection with her, added her on Facebook, and we've become friends. And she's got a little girl, and she actually came to visit us. She's from Guilford. She now lives in upstate New York. She came to see us when we were down at a beach house for the summer. So I've stayed in touch with her all these years. This was maybe 2008. So at the end of the meal, she was very engaged server, very foodie centric. We're talking about, this came from Brian Miller's backyard and it was grown, picked yesterday. I don't know, it's just something like that just made me very happy. And the food was delicious. I said, who made this food? This food is exceptional. Lights out good. She says, it's Chef Tyler Anderson. I said, really? I said, well, can I meet this guy? She says, well, sure. So she goes in the back and, out comes Tyler, who's, Tyler from Millwrights up the street and Tyler. So Tyler comes out and I'm like, hey, I just give him a handshake and say, wow, like your food is really good. He's like, thank you. And he sits down. There was nobody in the restaurant. And he tells me, he grew up in Long Beach, California, and then made his way to the East Coast of Vermont. And it was in Chicago at the Four Seasons, sort of bouncing around. And I said, oh my God, like, I just love your food. I want to come back. And he gave me his business card. He says, hey, you're going to come back. Just, shoot me an email. So I emailed him. And my wife always jokes I sort of worm my way into people's lives, but I look at it different. She jokes, but no, I'm like interested. So I write to him, and I love good service, and I love connections. And a lot of my friends always joke with me that like my nickname is Rich as I got a guy, like I got a guy. So I like write to him. I got to come in. He's like, great. So he comes in. He has a great seat, and he like next thing you know, he's like sending stuff out to us, like try this. And before you know it, it's we get to talking more. We stay after. He invites us to a party that they're throwing there. He then tells me that he's trying to get his own restaurant. I link him up with somebody who then helps him find the space which is now Millwrights, which is now 6 or 7 years old, very successful restaurant, Millwrights. I said, I'm a lawyer. I can help you out. Just keep me fed. I'm just trying to meet people. I'm not going to, charge you anything. Let's just hook me up, I don't need much. I just want to help you, and you'll help me meet people. And of course, he's sort of this up and comer on the food scene. Yeah. We start hanging out. I didn't have kids at the time. We go to New Orleans together. He takes us to all these restaurants, and the chefs are feeding us. And then even here, he would call me up on a Monday or Tuesday saying, hey, I'm going to what was before Millet 2T. Now it's the present company. I meet that chef. And before you know it, he takes me to all these places, and he says, this is my lawyer, you should hook up with him. And before you know it, people are calling me. I have work for you. I have work for you. I have work for you. And I wind up doing the deal that got him Millwrights, wind up doing all the other restaurant work for him.
We thank you for that,
yes,
by the way.
Yes, it's great. And then I meet all the other chefs. Pam Pados, who we know, met me through, and I still do work for Pam and for her place. So I met a ton of chefs, and again, I still do some of that work. So like I said, I think I'm not all exclusively family. I have like 5% with restaurant work, and I still do that. But that got me sort of into the scene and sort of out there, and folks call me when there's a problem, and people get divorced now, or they have issues, and I can get them to people. And it was just that encounter that I said to this really engaged waitress, I love this food. Can I meet the guy who made it? Wow. Such a simple thing. Yeah. I was genuinely interested. I wasn't thinking about this is going to help propel my career and meet anybody. Right. I'm just doing the right thing. I want to meet this guy and sort of see like, wow, like I really, tell me your story, man. Like, and we hit it off, and now we're, friends a very long time. We've traveled together. And we, and he to this day will let me know when he's got a new dish. I'll pop in, kind of thing. So I don't know. That's a sort of a chance encounter that sort of ties into me professionally that I think is a interesting story.
That story. I wasn't. It took me about 8 seconds to realize it was going to be Tyler, and I got very excited because I've always been personally curious about that. For those listening, if you ever pass through Connecticut, he's got a bunch of restaurants, but in Simsbury, where I live, this Millwrights is just. It's off the charts. Yeah. I took my wife, surprised her, took her there for our first wedding anniversary, and we did the whole tasting menu. Oh, yeah. And I knew I got in touch with him in advance, and because we had passed, we had crossed paths once or twice, and he came out at one point, said hello, did the whole thing, which made me look like a rock star in front of my new wife at the time.
Tyler is in the hospitality business, and he's a multiple time James Beard Award nominee. Like he's the real deal.
Yeah, he's been on the Food Network stuff, right?
He won second season of Chopped, I think.
Yeah.
And then he was on Top Chef.
I got to get him on this podcast.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He's
talk. He's great. He's tatted up. He was skateboarder. I mean, he's got a great story.
So what I love about that story you just told, and this will be great to take us into the end of this conversation, which went in so many different directions than I could have never planned at this conversation. You notice I never turned my tablet on to look at my questions,
and I didn't plan for this either. Right. I just sort of came in here fresh.
So to be honest, before you came out, I was just like, what do I ask a lawyer? I like this guy, but what do I ask a lawyer that's interesting? And this was probably one of the most interesting conversations I've had in ages. So this is great. What I love about that story is that so often when I do my workshops and I do my speeches and I write my stuff and I teach about connection and all this stuff, I teach it as a philosophy, as a life philosophy. And I think what a lot of people, they get this idea like you said, skin deep, this idea of, oh, you're just using these tactics to help get you ahead. And you're like, no, it doesn't work like that, because you have no idea which person is going to get you ahead. It would be lunacy to try to do
Correct.
that. The people you think are going to get you ahead, they can tell that's what you're trying to do, and you're going to miss out on all the ones that would actually do it. So the actual way to do what I call the 3 New People philosophy, because that's the book I wrote, right? But this philosophy of connection is to be genuinely interested in everyone you meet.
That's right.
Because you told that story, and that's just a survivorship bias. That's the story that led to something
Right.
interesting. So that's why it's the one you're telling. But you probably this week have already had 20 or 30 chance encounters with people that are not going to lead to anything more than that beautiful 10 seconds or 2 minutes or 10 minutes
Connecting
that you
with another
spent
human,
with them.
right.
Bingo. And I think that is such a good takeaway, that all it takes is say, hey, who made this? Can I meet that person? It can lead to all these amazing things. It probably won't, and that's okay. Because even if all you'd ever done is had a nice conversation, you would have gotten to thank the person who made that great meal, and he would have gotten to feel really good about having impacted someone's life.
Well, but it also creates, if you're an energy person, it's just
Yeah.
your sort of karmic energy.
Yeah.
You're doing the right thing. But also, like, and I'll just sort of give you this as well. I've traveled a lot. I've been to India 3 times.
Wow.
I'm a big believer in knowing certain ways to say hello in other people's languages, how to say how are you. And it's not, and again, I'm not looking for business from these people.
Yeah.
I want to, it feels good to me. And if it feels good to you, you'll have a better energy about you. You make somebody's day, and you never know where it'll lead, but it could lead somewhere great. And, but more importantly, it'll nourish you as a person, and people, being a friendly person, being a kind person, that makes you live a better life, I think. And so, but it'll also help your business, and it'll help your networking, because people want to do business with nice people, and people that are good people that are genuine. And so you can't fake it. But you can certainly be more curious and make an effort to care more. And you'll see the benefits of that. You may not see it right away, but you're planting seeds everywhere. And at some point you'll come back to it, and there's a bouquet.
Rich, I can't thank you enough for being
Sure.
here, man. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Who else thinks Rich should be a motivational speaker? What a closing. As promised, here are a few of my biggest takeaways from this episode. First, there are lots of different ways to answer the question, what do you do? Our instinct is to answer with our job title, but is that really all you do? We can choose to define ourselves pretty much however we want. When I sat down with Seth Godin on Season 2, Episode 1, we discussed the fact that he calls himself a teacher, not a marketer. Words matter. How we define our role in society dictates how we feel about ourselves and affects everything from our self-confidence to our happiness. Second, it's great to be connected, but you should also be a connector. Rich casually described a profound life philosophy when he said, whatever your problem is, come to me. I'll triage it and get you to the right person. You don't need to be able to solve every problem, but if you're the one who points friends, family, colleagues, and clients to the person that can solve their problem, you're indispensable. And finally, the number one reason relationships break down is lack of empathy. This is just as true at work as in our personal lives. I've said it before, it's not enough to care about someone. They have to feel cared about. They have to feel understood and valued. For all things Rich Rochlin, head to the show notes on beyondnetworkingpodcast.com. You'll see links to his social and website, plus any of those fun extra videos or photos from the various wild stories we got to talk about here. And before I let you go, I did promise to tell you a little bit more about the Public Leadership Mastermind opening up in May. The punchline is this: times of crisis reveal true leaders. The Great Recession of 2008 to 2010 gave us Instagram, Venmo, Groupon, Uber, Pinterest, Slack, and Square. While most people, most teams, most organizations are shrinking and hiding, you can do the opposite. You can double down on human connection in an isolated world. The rules are gone. Someone is going to rewrite them. For once, shouldn't it be you? The Leadership Mastermind revolves around one simple principle. Leadership is not a title. It is a choice. In this 3-month intense program, you will build leadership skills, not because I'm there, but by leveraging the power of the group. I'm simply a facilitator. I'm there to ask the right questions in the right way at the right time. But you will get to develop creative solutions to pressing problems in your life, with your team, in your organization, in your community. Because again, leadership is not a title. You can choose to be a leader. All of us are smarter than any of us, and I can't wait to see what you lead us to in the mastermind. So head to brianmillerspeaks.com/join. There's very little information there at the moment. I'm only letting people put their email in to jump on the waiting list. Over the next few weeks, I will roll out the specifics, the details of the mastermind. As far as I know right now, it's going to be 3 months with 2 group meetings per month, plus each member will get one one-on-one coaching call with me to work through your specific issues, goals, and concerns. So again, brianmillerspeaks.com/join, pop your email in, click the box that says Public Leadership Mastermind Waiting List, and you'll be hearing from me over the next few weeks. We do already have more folks on the waiting list than I will even have slots available, but I'm hoping we can get you in. That said, my name is Brian Miller. This is Beyond Networking, and we'll see you soon.
Until I met Brian, it's safe to say I never had a good video conference. The technology was there, but the connection wasn't. Brian has a way about him that he can facilitate a meeting that makes everyone feel special and important. At the same time, he asks these amazing questions that get you thinking in a way that you just never would on your own.
He made me feel comfortable from day one. He lifted up my confidence, and his sessions were so focused and so productive that it didn't even take that much time with him to get me to the place that I needed to be.
I've worked with Brian over the last several months. In fact, almost a year now we've been working together, and he's been absolutely fantastic, and he's just a super guy and couldn't recommend him more highly.
And let me just tell you, when I reached out to Brian the first time, I could tell that this guy is so genuine, knows his stuff. I mean, hello, TEDx with over 3 million views. Get on a call with this man and work with him, because it is the best investment you could possibly make at one of the most important milestones in your career. So, Brian, thank you so much for such an amazing experience. You're an incredible, incredible coach, and I'm so fortunate to have worked with you.